Of the Emperor's 20 sons, many of them have a love-hate relationship with one another. None of the primarchs would carry on like this quite to the degree that the Lion did. Then again, most of them were willing to choose a hate-hate relationship with one another instead, so maybe it's not that bad after all, seeing as he's not responsible for any of their deaths, which is considerably better than most other brothers. The Lion would be well known for his incredible prowess in combat and waging war, but also his inflexibility and incorrigible nature. He considers himself infallible, deservedly so given his record of success, but has no interest in pleasantries. He's a true wartime general, not fit for diplomacy, but absolutely necessary when the discussion turns sideways. Let's now begin on the Lion's vast, storied, and legendary history. Upon the scattering of the primarchs, the Lion was thrown onto the death world of Caliban. This planet was carpeted in dense forests. Within them resided monstrous, vile beasts born of Chaos's influence. Caliban was also home to civilizations dotting its surface, the people within developing a knightly order of sorts to defend their populace. Donning decrepit power armor and wielding ancient weapons, they would attempt to defend their fortresses with veritable results, mostly bordering on the negative side of things. We're not positive how much time the Lion spent roaming the wilderness of Caliban, but what we do know is that he spent enough time hunting down the green depths to have legends of him develop across the human influence of the planet over a span of decades. Unlike most of his brothers, he had grown into maturity without the aid of humanity. While his brothers were learning the virtues or terrors of humanity, the Lion was alone, learning how to become an apex predator. As opposed to the savage you may be picturing, the Lion was no feral idiot. He had been honed into an acutely tuned hunter. Deemed too dangerous, the knights that found him thought it safest he be killed, the intervention of a knight named Luther preventing such rash action. Luther would train the Lion to embrace the values of the knightly order he was adopted into with great success. The Lion would develop into the greatest warrior the Order had ever seen in no time at all, and would soon take larger action against the beasts. The Son of the Forest would call for a concerted effort to root out and exterminate every last evil denizen of the untamed wilds. Although widely met with support, there were detractors to this summons, claiming the culling of monsters would be detrimental to Caliban's social structure, as if getting eaten by a fucking demon dinosaur wasn't detrimental already. The Lion would consider such words no different than an act of war, as these kinsmen were now in support of the enemy, razing their entire orders to rubble. As the ranks grew and the war against the beast continued, the Lion would be resolute that this foe must be hunted down in totality. Should a single monster remain, this hard-fought battle would be all for naught. At the end of the war, the Lion had gained the honor of becoming the Order's Grand Master. To all of Caliban, he had grown to be equal parts respected and feared. Soon, he would become the penultimate weapon of war wielded by the Emperor, unyielding, unrestrained, and unrivaled. The reunion between the Lion and the Emperor went surprisingly rocky, not due to them, but their constituents. Originally, all went well, the Lion's Legion showing up, him besting the company commander in a friendly duel, and them creating a mutual respect between one another. Eventually, the Emperor himself arrived, and some knights actually tried killing him. So, they're dead now. Then, a constant throughout his story, the old masters of the First Legion were upset at the Lion's new leadership. That's the issue with ideologues. They're a force to be reckoned with when they agree, but goddamn are they detrimental and stubborn when they don't. Once again, strong-arming changed, the Lion's First Legion would demand all the knightly orders from across Caliban unite under one banner. Most agreeing, but more dissenting thoughts would begin to develop here as well. Now, this could all come to pass in time with no real catalyst, but alas, there was Luther. Luther would be the lightning rod for all the jealousy, shame, and pride of the Dark Angels that took offense with the Lion. The Lion's brothers wouldn't exactly take kindly to him either, and he didn't much help matters. Let me not mince words. The man's profession is not only in war, it's also in being socially inept. He doesn't really understand the whole concept of emotions in the slightest. The Lion views anything that gets in the way of completing objectives like cordiality or vendettas as a waste of time, and voices it openly. He actually wanted Horus's position as War Master, but he wasn't really in the running because of his tendency of killing before negotiating. Finding equals amongst his brothers like Fulgrim in swordsmanship or Rebute in militaristic tactics, he was always superior as a whole. Completely unrivaled in his fuck shit up ability, the Lion would be tasked with going far away to bring the worst of the galaxy's creation to heel, which really was the best task for him. It minimized personal interaction and maximized damage to the enemies of the Empire. The majority of his time spent before the betrayal of Horus and subsequent galaxy-spanning civil war was spent building his war machine from the scraps of his predecessor's failures. Prior to the arrival of the Lion, his Dark Angels were twisting in the wind, and following a complete restructuring, you guessed it, more jealousy. Space Marines would get shifted around not due to their tenure or experience, but compatibility for their position, which makes sense, but it also breeds a bit of resentment. This would lead to older members like Luther, who weren't able to keep up, cultivating more disdain towards their leader. Even still, his new command structure was mostly met with a positive reception by the men as they now had a true leader. The Lion was always at the forefront of the charge, never tasking his men with something he wouldn't do himself. He would operate under the impression that all in his command would take after his stoic and pragmatic nature. There's so many wars he gets into, they have to be put into other videos, or else it will take hours. I will, however, summarize an interaction with him and his forces running a relief effort. Ultramarines are pinned down, getting slammed by wave after wave of juiced-up zombies. They're not getting a single inkling of hope that they're going to survive this. Out of nowhere, a massive black and green ship enters atmosphere with its docks already open. Ships descend, dropping Space Marines adorned with winged swords on their armor, and they completely clean the board. The only things left where the enemies once stood are ash and bone. Then a man towering above the rest of his Marines with a massive greatsword approaches. Recognizing this as a primarch the legions had issue with before, they get nervous and wonder if they're next. Once they raise their heads, he's already moved on to the next objective, now that he's confirmed this one is complete. You see, the Lion doesn't care about petty squabbles. He only cares about killing the enemy by any means necessary. Before he kicked off the Civil War, there were key things Horus needed to do in order to make sure he could even get it off the ground. One of those at the top of the list was getting the Lion and his Dark Angels as far the fuck away from him as possible. You see, the Traitor Legions had Horus and Perturabo, and that was the extent of their roster for competent leaders. Should the Lion have attacked any of the rest, they would simply cease to be. All things considered, Horus actually did a pretty fantastic job at keeping the Lion occupied. He was smart enough to realize that the best way to keep the Lion occupied is to throw that goddamn badger Conrad Kurz at his face over and over and over again. The relationship of the Night Haunter and the Lion is not a complicated one. Conrad shows up, Conrad gets his legion demolished by the Dark Angels, then Conrad torments the Lion personally for months until he gets stabbed or his back is broken. The first time this happens, Conrad hides out on the Lion's own battleship as he passes through space. The second and third time being on the home planet of Rebute Boring Man, Macragge. On Macragge, the Lion was effectively appointed an interim war master for the mini-imperium formed by Rebute and Sanguinius, the reason for its founding being an absence of information about the state of the Empire and an inability to reach it. Things were going decently enough as they attempted to gather their bearings until the belle of the ball Conrad showed up once again. Conrad tried to kill Rabute's mom, so Gilly, along with the lion, pursued their brother. This would culminate in Conrad blowing up a building on top of them, and some teleporting of them being necessary for survival. Continuing his search for curs, he would enact martial law and piss off his brothers by suggesting they bomb the city he was hiding in from orbit. The lion would finally find Conrad, beat the piss out of him, and brought him to his brothers to stand trial. Conrad, while imprisoned, claimed the lion fired upon civilians, betraying his brother's orders, a claim that would make the lion attempt to kill him then and there. Sanguinius would stop him, then Guilliman would bitch him out for the casualties. The lion would storm out, beginning his departure back to Caliban, but halted and returned to stop Sanguinius from killing Conrad after the trial. Reason being, Conrad said he had premonitions of an assassin sent by the Emperor to kill him, so there was reason to think that the war isn't lost as long as he was alive. After this, they traveled together but disbanded the mini-Imperium because there was no need of it if theirs still stood. Sanguinius, Guilliman, and the Lion were divided from the final battle of the Civil War on Terra by a magical space storm, but they found a loophole. By beating a planet to death, they were able to travel through a wormhole and end up on the correct side of the galaxy. This is not a joke. The Lion breaks 3 more planets after this. The Lion didn't have a half-decent line of communication between him and the other Loyalist forces, so he took matters into his own hands. Instead of checking out Terra, he started pummeling the traitor homeworlds into dust in efforts to get their attention and draw them from Terra. The planets Chemos and Barbarus, where the primarchs Fulgrim and Mortarion grew up, were completely destroyed by the Lion. I don't mean he burnt them a little bit. I mean these things are cracked like eggs you threw at the floor. They're not coming back. He then went to Deliverance, the planet of the 19th Legion, stumbling across the loyal primarchs Leman Russ and Corvus Corax. Russ would join the Legion on the way back to Terra, but Corvus sent next to nobody. His Legion was still scarce, as he had been one of the first legions betrayed by Horus. The Lion would be too late to save the Emperor, but the war would be won, and he returned to Caliban to recuperate. L. Jonson would come to find that in his absence, Luther and several remaining Dark Angels were corrupted by the very same chaotic forces that controlled Horus, turning his legion against them. Absolutely piss-drunk mad at this, he scorched another planet's surface with orbital strikes. However, this was Caliban, he liked Caliban, he didn't totally break Caliban. Yet. Luther had been empowered by chaos, and was now equal in power to the Lion. Their blades met upon the scarred surface of his home planet, trading slashes with lethal intent, Luther getting the upper hand upon incapacitating the Lion with a psychic attack. Instead of delivering a killing blow, Luther broke free from the grip of chaos and allowed himself to be imprisoned by the Dark Angels. A result of this being the Chaos Gods lashing out as they had lost another of their chosen, destroying the planet of Caliban. See, told you it was happening. We're up to 4. The only remnant being the fortress monastery of the Dark Angels, now known as the Rock. Very creative. All the traitorous Dark Angels having been thrown to the vastness of the warp, now to be known as the Fallen. As for Lionel Jonson, he was in a comatose state for give or take 10,000 years. Once those years subsided, the fabled old man Jonson would travel the expanse of the galaxy, his legend growing ever more. This is one of those incredibly in-depth portions, so I'm gonna have to paraphrase for you. He wakes up with amnesia on a strange planet, beats some demons to death with his bare hands, then gets racked with his memories upon seeing a fallen angel. He would tackle his former son, then in a feat of miracle, instead of just beating him to death, old man Jonson actually has a conversation. Greater yet, he was understanding. Turns out in the revolution of Caliban, it wasn't a unanimous decision. There was actually a massive amount of the Fallen thinking they had been abandoned by their leader. I honestly find it hard to believe, but Mr. Kill First, Ask Questions Later is going around exercising humility. Hell has frozen over, rain is flowing upwards, and dogs are meowing. The lion had also, along this journey, acquired a newfound ability to teleport across entire planets, no less, with all of his companions. He is now entirely in tune with the nature of life itself and moves freely throughout it. He then roams several planets, forgiving the very men he would have had condemned to death without question in his prior life. Jonson, after gathering some of his once forsaken sons, takes them along to kill a demon lord, and is met afterward by Dante, the current leader of the Blood Angels. Come to see rumor be reality. Out of every space marine imaginable, Dante is the best possible one for Jonson to speak to, because this golden brick shithouse has been alive for everything. He's so old he had actually met Sanguinius during the Civil War. Dante is very much an undersold legend. He has more than earned his right to a full video in the future. But we're not talking about Dante today. He then catches Jonson up on the rest of the big events he's missed, mentioning Gilliman. Old man Jonson, learning about the state of the world in his absence, is now intent on meeting with his newly resurrected brother Rebute, and seeing what has become of his father's empire. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the lion so far. I believe out of all the primarchs, the lion may have the most satisfying character development out of them all. Seeing him change from the stubborn warrior hell-bent on his enemy's destruction into a wise yet formidable old man is better than any revenge quest you could have cooked up. After learning more about him, and this may be controversial, I honestly see him as the Uncle Iroh of Warhammer. Except instead of failing at bossing Say, he directly resulted in 4 planets being destroyed, which it's relatively on the same scale. The ruthless and impulsive general transforming into the understanding and knowledgeable shepherd is a perfect turn for me. Go ahead and tell me what you make of it. Would you have preferred the revenge quest angle? If so, vote Corvus the next time you see him. You'll like it. Don't worry. Just vote Corvus next time. Otherwise, that's it for me today. Feel free to join the Discord server for Warhammer questions or voting for finalists, and check out the other Primarch videos that have made their way out too. By the way, I know it looks like Gilly is winning the poll right now, but the lion was at 3 a.m. when I was writing this, so he gets the win. I think I've done enough talking for today. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.